Hey guys, this is Adina from Immigrant Finance, and today I'm going to be talking to y'all about how you as an immigrant can open a bank account in the US. So, first of all, what kinds of immigrants can open a bank account in the US? Who's able to do that? It's sort of a trick question because actually everyone can open a bank account in the US. There's a lot of misinformation about this. A lot of people think that they might not be able to, for example, if they don't have legal immigration status, if they're undocumented, or if they don't have a certain type of status. But actually, banks should not be asking you what your immigration status is in the US. It's a separate system in the financial system. It's not part of the immigration system. And that is just not one of the factors that's relevant for opening a bank account. How it comes in, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is what kind of identification and proof you have to give of yourself to show that you are who you say you are. Can get a little more complicated, but there's ways around that that can make it possible for someone to be able to get a bank account. But first, I want to touch on why it is important for immigrants to open bank accounts in the U.S. And one of the reasons we started Immigrant Finance is because when my husband, who is an immigrant, moved to the U.S. about 6 years ago, it was really, really scary for us trying to figure out whether he could do basic things, basic personal finance things like opening a bank account, opening a credit card, how he could pay rent, all these things as a new immigrant in the U.S. And it was really, really overwhelming for us, and that is a really big reason that we started Immigrant Finance, to be able to help people navigate that better, because we don't want people to have to struggle like we did. And there really wasn't any information out there on the internet in one easy place to figure out how immigrants could learn about personal finance that's specific to the immigrant experience. So that's why we started immigrantfinance.com, and it really started off, the first step was just figuring out how to have a bank account. So the reason why it's so important is because it gives you stability when you're moving to a new place, for a lot of reasons. A lot of immigrants in the immigrant community have cash only lifestyles, and that's super common for a lot of people and in a lot of other countries. But it is not the safest thing because it puts you in a very risky situation. For example, if you ever got robbed or got taken advantage of in some situation, all your money could be gone just like that. But if your money's in a bank account, that's a lot harder to lose, right? In a lot of other countries, like the country where my husband comes from in South America, there's a lot of mistrust of the banks for good reason. He actually grew up when the bankers in his country literally stole all the people's money and left the country, and there was no insurance or anything. A lot of people lost all their life savings. Nothing is ever fully guaranteed, but the U.S. is one of the safest places in the world to use a bank to store your money, because if you do use a bank that is what's called FDIC insured, it stands for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. If the bank says it's FDIC insured, that means that up to $250,000 of money that you put into that bank account in a single account will be insured if, for example, the economy crashes or there's a huge Great Depression or something like that, and the bank can't actually give you your money. The federal government insures that up to $250,000. So that gives some assurance that makes having a bank account in the U.S. very unique compared to other countries and a lot safer. And certainly, in my opinion, at least much safer than having your money under a mattress, right? If you have your money under your mattress or hidden somewhere in your house or a freezer or whatever, someone can rob you and take it, or someone who knows where that is could take advantage of you if you're in a vulnerable situation, and all your money can be lost. So having a bank account gives you that stability, to know that you have your money in a safe, at least safer place, that you know where to find it, that only you or whoever you give permission to has access to it. And it also is really important to have a bank account for a second reason, for immigration matters. So at immigrantfinance.com, we talk a lot about the intersection of personal finance issues and immigration law. I'm actually an immigration attorney in my 9-to-5 day job, so that's how I think about this aspect of it. But the reason that it's so helpful to have a bank account in the U.S. for immigration purposes is because doing so allows you to pay taxes more easily. If you're undocumented, for example, you can actually only open a bank account in most banks if you get a certain number called a ITIN number, ITIN. We're going to get more into that as well in a second. But you get that through paying taxes. And so when you go through that process and you're paying taxes and you have a record of you paying taxes for years in the U.S. and a bank account to show you've been living here for years, that can be extremely helpful evidence if you are ever in an immigration problem in the future. If you have to go to immigration court, for example, you can go and pull up your bank records and use that to show all the dates you've been here. You can also pull up your tax records, show you've been paying taxes, you've been a contributing, responsible member of society for all these years. And that is very persuasive evidence to share with an immigration judge, for example. Also, if you are ever applying for a green card in the future, it would also be helpful to have that same documentation to show the dates you've been here and also that you've been paying taxes, contributing to society. And finally, we don't know what will ever happen in the future, and it's looking pretty not hopeful at the moment, but there could be at some point in the future, perhaps in a different administration, immigration reform. And in the past, immigration reform has looked into the dates that people have been here and establishing that they've been here by a certain date. So having a bank account with records of deposits you're making, or when you open the bank account, again, is going to show you those really important dates, have an official record that you would be able to use to perhaps qualify for any potential immigration reform in the future. So these are some reasons why at Immigrant Finance, we think that opening a bank account is a really great idea for immigrants. I know for my husband, when he opened his, that was the first big step to him really building his financial stability in the U.S. because, he had his own bank account. He had his own debit card. When he, was able to make money, he had a place to put it. And when he needed money, he knew exactly where to go and get it. So that gave him, I think, some footing here in the U.S. to have something that he felt like was his own and that he was building something and saving and working towards something. So that alone is, it sounds simple for some people, but it's a really profound step to even have a place where you can be putting away money and saving it, and not just have it in cash where it's easier to spend. It's a lot easier to not spend if you don't have the cash right in your hand, right? So next, I'm going to talk about how you can actually open a bank account in the U.S. if you're an immigrant. So generally, there are two main things you need to do that. And again, it's going to depend on the bank. Every bank will be a little bit different, but the two main things generally that are required are first, having some kind of identification number, and second, having an identification card. So let's first talk about the identification number. So there's two ways to do that. The first, which is the easier way, is to have a social security number. So there are several types of immigrants who do have social security numbers. The main group is lawful permanent residents or green card holders. Green card holders are able to get a social security number. So are people who have won asylum in the U.S. They're called asylees. They can get social security numbers. And also certain people with certain visas that allow them to work in the U.S. are also able to have social security numbers. So if that is the case, or if you've been able to become a U.S. citizen, you will have a social security number, and that can be your identification number to open a bank account. Where it gets a little bit more complicated but still doable is if you are undocumented. If you don't have any legal status in the U.S., you will not have a social security number, but you can get something called an individual taxpayer identification number. The acronym for that is ITIN, or I call it ITIN. So having an ITIN is your way to show a bank that you have an identification number tied to your name. And there's a process to do this, to get one of these. It is associated with paying taxes, federal taxes to the federal government through the Internal Revenue Service, or IRS. So what you do is, the first time to get your first ITIN number, if it's your first time applying for it, you're going to be filing a tax return to the federal government and attaching a form with that called W-7. And on that form is actually only one page. It's pretty easy to fill out. It's like your name, your address, and other information. And you provide that with the tax return to the federal government. And then you also have to show supporting documents. So the supporting documents have to establish two things. First, they have to show your identity, who you are. And second, your connection to a foreign country. Because the whole purpose of an ITIN number is to allow foreign nationals or people from other countries to be able to pay taxes in the U.S. if they're making income in the U.S. So you are showing who you are and what country you are associated with. There's only one document that will satisfy both of those requirements that allow you to do that in one step, and that is a passport from your home country. It would have to be unexpired, and actually any documentation you would use to show your identity or your connection to your home country would have to be an unexpired document. It has you have to show either also an original document or a certified copy, which is like a copy of the original document with the government agency that is giving that, certifying that it is a true and correct copy. So you can either mail in those original copies to the IRS when you submit your application, and they will be sending it back to you. Or you can make an appointment with the IRS on their website to come in and show your original documents. Personally, if it was me, I would do that, because I never trust handing over original documents to government agencies, because you never know, things can get lost. So I think the appointment is a good way to go. And at least one of these documents that you provide to show your identity and your connection to a foreign country has to have your photograph. So again, the easiest way to do this is with a passport, because that's going to show both your identity and your connection to your foreign country, because your passport will be from your home country. And it has to be unexpired, and it will also have your photograph. So passport that's unexpired is the best way to do it. But there's also several other types of documents that can qualify. They're all listed on the IRS website. If you just Google W-7 or W-7 ITIN instructions, it will come up and provide, actually there's a chart of, I believe, 13 different types of documents that will qualify. So going through this process, I know it sounds really complicated, but just big picture again, if you are undocumented, the way you can get an identification number to open a bank account is by filling out Form W-7 to the IRS with a tax return, and then having documentation that shows your identity and what country you're from. That documentation has to be unexpired, and it has to be either an original or certified copy that you mail in or go and show at an appointment, and at least one of those documents that you use has to have a photograph on it of you. So we were just talking all about how to get an identification number to open a bank account in the U.S. So for undocumented people, it's an ITIN, and then for other types of immigrants like green card holders or asylees, it can be a social security number. The second thing you need to show to open a bank account in the US is an identification card, like a card issued by a government agency showing who you are. So not just a number, but an actual ID card. Again, if you do have lawful status, like a green card, for example, or if you have asylum, you can show actually your green card or your driver's license, for example. If you have a state driver's license, that will serve the purpose of showing an identification card. If you're undocumented, again, it gets a little bit more complicated, but there are several cities around the U.S. that do provide identification cards to undocumented immigrants. So, for example, Los Angeles, San Francisco, D.C., New York, Chicago, Detroit, Phoenix, all these places provide these types of IDs. So that could be an option to get an identification card to show that for a bank. You could also try using a passport or a national ID card, maybe from the consulate of your country. It's going to depend on the bank, what they will be open to have. But if you do use a passport, it probably will need to be unexpired again. So I recommend that you look in your area at the local banks there and do some research online about which ones do accept ITIN numbers, for example, or other alternative forms of identification to allow immigrants to open a bank account there. Just looking online a little bit at some of the national banks around the country, there's actually several really good national banks, good reputations, that are reliable, that do take ITIN numbers and allow undocumented immigrants to open bank accounts. So, for example, Wells Fargo, Chase, Bank of America, Capital One. These are all really good options to open a bank account. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment for me or send me an email at hello@immigrantfinance.com. You can also check out immigrantfinance.com. We have a lot of great resources and blogs there, including more information about opening a bank account in the U.S. and other things like credit cards, setting up an emergency fund, saving, opening a business as an immigrant. And this is a great way to learn more and empower yourself and build stability and wealth in the U.S. So we're really excited to be working with you and learning more together.